It wasn't driftwood floating in the ocean. It was a dog, alone, 130 miles from shore. Cal Morrison squinted into the bright morning sun, steering his boat over the waves off the Florida coast. The former Marine had traded in his military days for a life of solitude, finding peace in the rhythm of the sea. Today, he was out on a solo fishing trip, enjoying the stillness of the water. As his only companion, the boat rocked gently under his feet, and the hum of the engine became a quiet backdrop to the occasional call of distant seabirds. As the day stretched on, the waters began to shift in an unfamiliar way. A ripple in the distance caught his attention. It wasn't the typical movement of a fish or a passing wave, but something else, something larger. At first, he thought it might be a piece of debris, perhaps an old barrel or some driftwood, but as he drew closer, the shape became unmistakable. A dog, struggling to stay afloat in the choppy waters. Cal's heart dropped. A dog? Out here? It didn't make sense. Without hesitation, he steered the boat closer. The dog, a German shepherd, was barely keeping its head above water. Its movements were sluggish, desperate. The sight of it stirred something in Cal's gut. He couldn't just leave it out there, not like this. As he brought the boat alongside the exhausted animal, the dog's head bobbed weakly in the water. Its fur was matted with sea salt and grime, eyes glazed with exhaustion. The faint sounds of its labored breathing could be heard above the waves. Cal reached out a hand, hoping the dog would have enough strength to make the leap, but it wasn't responding. Too weak, too far gone. The poor thing was running on fumes. He acted fast, using a rope to pull the animal aboard. With one final desperate lunge, the dog collapsed onto the quarter deck, its legs buckling underneath it. Cal was immediately struck by how frail the animal seemed. It was as if it had been in the water for days, not just hours. The German shepherd lay motionless, barely breathing. Cal ran a quick check over the dog's body. No collar, no microchip, just a rusted metal tag around its neck with the single letter K engraved on it. It was the only clue as to who this dog might be or where it came from. His mind raced with questions. How did this dog end up out here? Why was it so far from shore? What had happened to it? And why had it been abandoned like this? Cal wasn't sure what to make of it, but one thing was clear. This dog wasn't just some lost pet. It had survived something, and that something was a story that Cal needed to uncover. Without a moment's hesitation, Cal fired up the engine and headed back toward the shore, the dog limp at his feet. He didn't know yet what he'd find when they got to the dock, or what would come next, but he knew this much. He wasn't leaving that dog to die alone in the sea. It had already fought too hard to survive. As the boat cut through the water, Cal looked down at the German shepherd, his heart heavy with a sense of responsibility. The dog wasn't just a survivor, it was a fighter. And somehow, Cal knew their fates were now intertwined. Cal's hands shook slightly as he carefully steered the boat toward the marina. The dog, whom he'd begun to think of as Kilo, based on the rusted tag, lay motionless on the deck, breathing shallowly. His mind raced. It wasn't every day that you find a German shepherd drifting alone at sea. But the more he looked at the dog, the more the situation seemed impossible. Kilo's fur was slick with salt water, clumped together in matted sections. His skin had a faint bluish tint, and his breathing was labored. He looked like he had been out there for far too long, barely holding on. As Cal pulled the boat up to the dock, a sense of urgency gripped him. He couldn't wait for the dog to wake up on its own. Time was critical. Cal quickly tied the boat to a post and jumped to the dock, holding Kilo securely as he lifted the dog into his arms, cradling him gently. The moment the dog's head rested against his chest, Cal felt a deep pang of empathy. The dog was just broken. Cal had seen enough in his years of military service to know the signs of someone or something close to the brink. Kilo wasn't just exhausted. There was something else in his eyes, a hollow, distant look that suggested this dog had been through far more than the ocean. Cal's mind snapped back to the situation at hand. He couldn't waste any more time. With a quick stride, he moved toward his truck. Kilo still in his arms. The dog's limbs hung limp, his body offering no resistance. Cal was used to heavy lifting, but this was different. This wasn't just about carrying a weight, it was about carrying a life, one that might not survive if he didn't act quickly. The nearest vet's office wasn't far, and in a matter of minutes, Cal was pulling up to the parking lot. He rushed Kilo inside, where a nurse immediately saw the state of the dog and led him to an examination room. Cal sat anxiously in the waiting area, his mind running through 1,000 different possibilities. Who had left Kilo out there? Why was he alone? And most troubling of all, what had been done to him? A few moments later, the vet, Dr. Sarah Green, emerged from the back room, her expression grave. She was in her late 30s, calm under pressure, and her sharp eyes quickly scanned Cal's face before focusing on the dog lying on the examination table. "This is bad," Dr. Green muttered, almost to herself. "Severe dehydration, torn pads, and extreme fatigue. He's also suffering from hypothermia, but his vitals are remarkably strong for how weak he seems." She paused, taking a deep breath as she turned her attention to Kilo. "This is a tough one, but it's clear this dog is a fighter." Cal's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this dog had a chance after all. Dr. Green placed a hand on Kilo's head, gently checking the dog's pupils. "He's also suffering from shock. We'll need to get him stabilized before we can do anything else." She glanced back at Cal, her eyes filled with professional concern. "You did the right thing by getting him here fast. I'm going to start an IV and give him fluids. He'll need rest, care, and a lot of patience. This isn't going to be an easy recovery." Cal nodded, watching as the vet worked swiftly to insert an IV into Kilo's leg. His mind was still buzzing with questions, but for now, all he could do was wait and pray that the dog would pull through. The hours dragged on as Cal sat beside the examination table, keeping a silent vigil. Dr. Green came in periodically to check on Kilo, offering brief updates on his condition. As night began to fall, the dog's breathing steadied, and his color slowly returned to something closer to normal. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Cal a sliver of hope. The sound of a ringing phone broke the silence in the room, and Dr. Green answered it quickly, stepping outside. Cal was left alone with the dog. He gently stroked Kilo's matted fur, thinking about the long road ahead. This wasn't just a dog he had found at sea. There was something about him that felt different. A lingering suspicion gnawed at him. When Dr. Green returned, she had a peculiar look on her face, one that Cal couldn't quite place. "I've run a quick scan to check for microchips," she said, her tone slightly changed. "But there's nothing. No chip, just that old tag with the letter K." "Just K," Cal repeated, his heart beginning to race again. The rusted tag was the only clue, but it told him nothing. Dr. Green frowned, her gaze narrowing slightly. Yeah, it's strange. No name, no registration. It's as if this dog doesn't exist in any official records, but I'm telling you, he's not a normal dog. He's been through something. More. That word echoed in Cal's mind. Before he could ask more questions, the vet spoke again. "I'll give you a call tomorrow with an update. But for now, I'd suggest keeping him here overnight. He's still too weak to be on his own." Cal hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. But then, he made a decision. "I'll take him home with me," he said. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a stray animal that had wandered too far. There was more to Kilo's story, and Cal was determined to find out what it was. As he left the clinic, the night air was cool, and the stars hung like faint diamonds above him. Kilo lay motionless in the passenger seat of Cal's truck, his breathing steady but still shallow. The questions continued to swirl in Cal's mind, but one thing was certain. Whatever secrets Kilo carried, Cal was now part of the story. And he wasn't going to stop until he knew the truth. The first few days after bringing Kilo home were a blur. Cal's small, modest house by the marina wasn't much, just a few rooms and a porch that faced the water. But it was peaceful. Cal had long since learned to embrace solitude, and it felt good to be back in his own space. But now, it felt different. There was another presence in the house, a quiet, haunting energy that seemed to hang in the air. Kilo had started to recover physically. He was eating, drinking, and regaining some of his strength. His eyes had stopped being so distant, but he still seemed to be lost in thought much of the time. At night, though, things began to change. Cal had set up a bed for Kilo in the corner of his living room, near the window. He didn't want the dog to feel confined, but he also knew that Kilo needed a safe place to rest. The first few nights were uneventful, but then, on the fourth night, Cal woke to find Kilo standing, tense and alert, by the window. At first, Cal thought he was imagining things. The dog had always been skittish, but this was different. Kilo's body was rigid, his ears pinned back, and his eyes locked onto something outside, something that Cal couldn't see. Kilo let out a low growl, his body trembling with restrained energy. Cal's heart raced, an uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. "What is it, boy?" Cal whispered, trying to catch the dog's attention. Kilo didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed, unblinking, on the night outside. Cal stood up slowly, crossing the room to where the dog was standing. He placed a hand on Kilo's back, feeling the muscles tense under his fingers. The growl deepened, a warning in the dog's throat, but Kilo didn't move from his position. "Something's out there," Cal muttered to himself. He peered through the window, but saw nothing but the endless black of the night sky and the gentle sway of the trees in the wind. There was no one around, just the usual quiet. Still, Kilo's reaction unsettled him. Cal wasn't sure what it was, but instinct told him that Kilo wasn't just reacting to a normal noise. This wasn't the kind of behavior you'd expect from a stray dog. The growl wasn't the only thing that gave it away. There was something in the dog's eyes, a level of awareness that seemed far beyond what any average animal would possess. The next day, as Kilo continued to recover, Cal began to notice other strange behaviors. The dog was hyper-alert, his ears constantly swiveling, his eyes scanning every corner of the room. Cal wasn't a dog expert, but he knew enough about animal behavior to recognize that something wasn't quite right. The way Kilo responded to certain sounds, a car starting, a distant bark, a rustle in the bushes, wasn't typical for a dog just recovering from the ocean. It was as if Kilo was on constant high alert, waiting for something. Or someone. Cal had lived through enough training exercises, enough military missions, to recognize the signs. He wasn't just imagining it. Kilo had been trained for something. And it wasn't just any training. It was military-grade, Black Ops level training. His suspicion grew stronger when Kilo reacted to something even more peculiar: hand signals. It happened during a morning routine when Cal went to feed the dog. Kilo was sitting, looking calm for once, his back to the door as Cal set the food down in front of him. But as Cal reached for the bowl to adjust it, he gave a simple hand gesture, just a small, practiced motion, the kind of thing Cal had done countless times in the military. And, to his surprise, Kilo's ears immediately perked up. The dog turned around, his eyes focused intently on Cal's hand. Without missing a beat, Kilo sat down obediently, his posture alert, as though waiting for further instructions. Cal froze, unsure of what he had just witnessed. He knew that military dogs were trained to respond to a variety of signals, both verbal and nonverbal. But Kilo hadn't just responded to the hand gesture as a command. He had reacted with precision, as though this was something he had done before, over and over again. It was becoming clearer by the day. This dog was no ordinary animal. Kilo was a tool, trained for something far beyond a regular pet's capabilities. Cal needed answers, and he wasn't about to let Kilo's past remain a mystery. That afternoon, he picked up the phone and called an old friend, Luis Vega. Luis had been a K-9 handler during Cal's military days. They hadn't kept in touch much after Cal retired, but Cal knew that if anyone could help him figure out what was going on with Kilo, it was Luis. Luis answered on the third ring, his voice still carrying that no-nonsense tone Cal remembered. "Cal, you found something?" "I think so," Cal replied, his voice low. "I've got a dog here, a German Shepherd. But there's something off about him. I think he was trained for military work." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then Louise spoke again, his tone serious. "I'll come by. Let's see what you got." Later that afternoon, Louise pulled into the marina, his truck kicking up dust as it came to a stop. Cal met him by the dock, where Kilo was waiting, looking calmer now, but still alert. Luis, a tall man with graying hair and a strong, square jaw, took one look at the dog and knew instantly what Cal was getting at. Let me take a look," Luis said, his voice steady. He crouched down in front of Kilo, extending his hand slowly towards the dog's face. Kilo didn't flinch. In fact, his gaze softened as he sniffed Luis's hand, and for a moment it was like there was a moment of recognition. Luis's fingers gently brushed the dog's coat, and then he straightened up. "Yeah," Luis said, nodding to himself. "This dog's been trained. Military training. He's definitely a K-9 unit, probably part of a Black Ops mission, judging by how he's reacting to hand signals and his overall demeanor." Cal's heart skipped a beat. "So you're saying he's a military dog?" Luis's expression darkened. "More than that, Cal. This dog isn't just trained for basic patrol or search and rescue. He's been trained for something covert, something classified." Cal's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. Kilo wasn't just a stray. He was a soldier, a tool trained for a mission that was still hidden in the shadows. And now it seemed that mission was far from over. The days following Luis's visit were filled with more questions than answers. The more Cal thought about what his old friend had said, the more he realized the depth of Kilo's mystery. This dog wasn't just a victim of abandonment. He was part of something far larger, something that Cal wasn't sure he was ready to confront. The thought that Kilo had been involved in covert military operations sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't the kind of thing you could simply forget or ignore. Cal spent the next few days watching Kilo closely. The dog seemed to be recovering physically, but the signs of his past training were becoming more evident every day. There was a heightened awareness in his movements, a constant alertness that Cal couldn't shake. Every time someone approached the house, Kilo would perk up, his ears swiveling as he watched with intense focus. Even the slightest sound, a door creaking, a car passing by, the rustle of leaves in the wind, seemed to set him on edge. But it wasn't just Kilo's reactions that were troubling. Cal started noticing strange things happening around the marina. One afternoon, while he was working on his boat, he saw a black SUV pull into the small parking lot near his dock. The vehicle was nondescript, black tinted windows, nothing too unusual at first glance. But the moment it parked, Cal felt a strange sense of unease. The vehicle didn't belong there. It wasn't a local fisherman or anyone he recognized. The men inside weren't familiar either, two of them, dressed in dark suits, stepping out quickly and looking around like they were out on a mission. Cal's instincts, honed over years of military service, kicked in immediately. He didn't even know why, but something about their presence set off alarm bells in his head. "Breeze?" He pretended to focus on his boat, casually glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. The men lingered near the parking lot, talking in low voices. They weren't making an effort to blend in, and that only made Cal more suspicious. After a few minutes, one of the men started walking toward the marina's office. The other remained by the car, keeping an eye on the surroundings. Cal watched them carefully, noting the way they moved. Precise, methodical. They were looking for something, or someone. The man who had gone inside came back shortly after, holding something in his hand. It was a small, folded piece of paper. He handed it to the man by the car, and they both exchanged brief words before getting back into the SUV and driving off without a word to anyone. That was the moment Cal realized something was off. He had no concrete evidence, but the interaction felt too deliberate. It didn't seem like a random visit, especially not in a quiet, out-of-the-way marina like his. But who would be looking for Kilo? And why would they be here, of all places? Over the next few days, Cal kept his guard up. His mind raced, running through every possibility. Could these men have been connected to Kilo's past? Were they somehow involved in his military training? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that his life had just become entangled in something far bigger than he had expected. Kilo seemed to sense the change in the air as well. The dog grew more agitated, especially at night. Cal would often wake up to the sound of barking, the low growl vibrating through the walls of the house. When he went to check on him, Kilo would be standing by the window, staring into the night, his posture tense. It was as if he was waiting for something, or someone. As one evening, as Cal was heading to bed, he noticed something strange. Kilo wasn't in his usual spot on the floor near the window. When Cal went into the living room, he found the dog sitting by the door, his back to him, staring at the lock. It was as though Kilo was guarding it, his body rigid, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something outside. Cal approached cautiously, crouching down to meet the dog's gaze. "What's going on, boy?" he whispered. The dog didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the door with a laser focus. Suddenly, there was a faint knock on the door, just a tap, barely audible, but enough to send Kilo into a frenzy. The dog's ears shot up, his hackles raised, and a sharp, aggressive bark echoed through the house. Cal's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting anyone. He rushed to the door, his hand hovering over the knob. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as the weight of the situation settled on him. This wasn't a regular knock. This was something else. He opened the door slowly, cautiously, his eyes scanning the darkened porch. No one was there, just the night. But Kilo was still growling, the deep rumble vibrating through his chest. His eyes darted toward the shadows, the dog's instincts clearly on high alert. Cal stepped outside, looking around once more. The moonlight barely illuminated the path, and the sound of the wind rustling the leaves was the only noise. There was nothing but an eerie quiet that settled over the marina like a fog. Kilo's barking subsided, but he remained on edge, his eyes flicking back and forth between Cal and the dark. Cal stood there for a moment, confused, trying to make sense of it all. But before he could think too deeply, the hairs on the back of his neck tingled again. A strange feeling had settled over him. Someone had been here? Someone had knocked? And Kilo had known it before Cal did. The unease that had been growing over the past few days now felt like an impending storm. The men in the SUV, Kilo's strange behavior, the mysterious knock, all of it seemed connected. But how? That night, as Cal lay awake in bed, his mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening, it was just the beginning. And whatever secrets Kilo was hiding, they were about to surface in a way that Cal couldn't ignore. The next day was colder than usual, and the morning fog hung thick on the water, a gray mist that seemed to seep into every corner of the marina, shrouding everything in a soft, uneasy silence. Cal stood on the deck of his boat, looking out at the distant horizon, his mind a whirlpool of confusion. The knock the night before had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Something was coming, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, but he could feel it in his bones. Kilo, who had been unusually quiet that morning, sat beside him on the deck. The dog's gaze was fixed on the water, his body tense, his ears twitching as if listening for something far beyond what Cal could hear. For a moment, the two of them simply stood there, watching the waves gently lap against the hull of the boat, the rhythm soothing, but deceptively calm. "Something's out there, isn't it, boy?" Cal muttered to the dog, as though Kilo might somehow be able to provide an answer. Kilo turned his head, meeting Cal's eyes for the briefest moment, then returned to staring out at the ocean. There was a look in the dog's eyes, something almost human, that made Cal's gut twist. It was as if Kilo understood everything, but was choosing not to speak. Or maybe he just didn't know how to explain the world he had come from. The knock the night before, had been more than just strange. There was a purpose behind it, and Cal knew it wasn't just some random visitor. Whoever had been on his porch had been looking for something. Someone. After a few minutes of staring out at the water, Cal made a decision. It was time to get answers. He couldn't keep wondering about Kilo's past while things continued to spiral. The black SUV, the strange behavior from Kilo, the cryptic knock on the door, it was all connected. And Cal was done waiting for it to unfold on its own. His first call was to Luis Vega, the retired K-9 handler who had already confirmed Kilo's military training. Luis had been invaluable in helping Cal make sense of the dog's behavior, but it was clear that there was still so much more to uncover. Luis was the only person Cal trusted with the truth about Kilo and about what might be coming. The phone rang a few times before Luis picked up. "Cal, what's going on?" Luis's voice was still sharp, but there was an undertone of concern. "I'm guessing this isn't just about the dog anymore." "You're right," Cal replied, his voice low. "There's something bigger going on. Last night, someone knocked on my door. I'm sure it wasn't just some random person. And Kilo, he knew it was coming. He was already on edge before I even heard the knock." Luis's silence on the other end of the line told Cal that his old friend was processing the information. Then, finally, Luis spoke. "Sounds like you got company, Cal. People don't knock unless they want something. And with a dog like Kilo, someone is looking for him. It's time to find out who that is. I'll come by. We'll get to the bottom of this." Cal felt a small sense of relief at the words. Luis was a man of action, someone who had seen his fair share of strange situations in the past. If anyone could help him figure out what was going on, it was him. Later that afternoon, Luis arrived at the marina, pulling his truck into the small lot. He was dressed in a faded military jacket, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms marked with tattoos that told stories of a past long gone. He stepped out of the truck, his eyes scanning the surroundings before he made his way over to Cal. "Any more strange visitors?" Luis asked, his gaze moving from Cal to Kilo, who was sitting quietly by the door, his ears still pricked and alert. "Not yet," Cal replied. "But I'm getting the feeling that something's coming. I can't explain it. No, but it's like they're getting closer, whoever they are." Luis nodded. "I've seen that look before, that gut feeling. It means something's coming, and it's not going to be pretty." Together they walked toward the house, where Kilo was still sitting by the door. The dog's eyes locked onto Luis, his posture becoming tense. Luis knelt down in front of Kilo, his hand outstretched in a slow, deliberate motion. The dog hesitated for a moment before moving forward, sniffing Luis's hand and finally allowing him to scratch behind his ears. There was a moment of silence between them, and then Luis spoke. "This dog's been through some serious stuff, Cal. It's not just military training. This dog's been through missions. Covert, high-risk stuff. Whoever trained him didn't just want a loyal dog. They wanted a weapon. Kilo's a tool used in operations you probably can't even imagine." Cal took a deep breath, the weight of Luis's words pressing down on him. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. Kilo wasn't just any dog. He was part of something dangerous, something bigger than the two of them. "We need to find out who's after him," Cal said, his voice firm. "And we need to do it fast." Luis stood up, his eyes scanning the surroundings once more. "You're right. Someone's looking for Kilo. And they'll stop at nothing to get him. We've got to be ready." Just as Luis was about to turn to walk back to the truck, there was a sudden sound. A faint noise, almost too soft to hear, but just enough to make both men freeze. It was the unmistakable hum of an engine in the distance. Cal's heart skipped a beat. It was the same sound he had heard the night before, the same one that had sent Kilo into a frenzy. "They're here," Luis said, his voice low and urgent. Cal's pulse quickened. He wasn't ready for this, not yet, but there was no turning back now. The game had begun. The faint sound of an engine in the distance grew louder with each passing second. Cal stood frozen on the dock, a lump of dread rising in his throat. His instincts, honed through years of military service, screamed at him to be ready. Whoever was approaching wasn't here for a friendly visit. It wasn't just the noise of the engine that set him on edge. It was the deep, gut-wrenching feeling that this was the moment everything had been leading to. The calm before the storm had passed, and now it was time to face whatever came next. Luis, standing beside him, seemed equally tense, his eyes scanning the horizon. The approaching sound was unmistakable now, a black helicopter, its blades cutting through the air with an unsettling whir. It wasn't a typical sightseeing tour or a casual military exercise. This was different. The sound of the rotors sent an involuntary shiver down Cal's spine. "They're here," Luis muttered under his breath, his voice grim. "And they've come for Kilo." Cal's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He wasn't going to let them take Kilo without a fight. The dog had been through hell already. He wasn't going to let him fall back into the hands of whoever had used him as a weapon. The helicopter hovered low above the marina, its shadow casting a dark silhouette over the water. Cal's hand instinctively went to the knife at his belt, but he knew that no amount of weapons would matter if these men were as dangerous as he suspected. They had the advantage. This was their turf, their operation, and they were about to make their move. As the helicopter landed with a loud thud, the blade slowly came to a stop, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The air felt heavy, thick with tension as two men in full tactical gear stepped out. They moved with precision, their faces hidden behind dark helmets and visors. There was something cold in the way they carried themselves, something that told Cal they weren't here for a peaceful negotiation. The men didn't approach the dock immediately. Instead, they stood at a distance, sizing up the situation. Their presence was deliberate, calculated. It was clear they were waiting for something. Or, someone. Cal exchanged a quick glance with Luis, his eyes narrowing. The game had changed. The stakes were higher now. Kilo wasn't just an ordinary dog. He was a key piece in something much larger, and these men were here to take him back. One of the men, taller and broader than the other, took a step forward. His voice rang out, harsh and authoritative, cutting through the silence. "We've come for the dog," he said, his tone flat and devoid of any emotion. "Release him, and no one gets hurt." Cal felt his blood run cold at the words. He wasn't going to let them take Kilo without a fight, not after everything the dog had been through. "I'm not giving him up," Cal responded firmly, his voice carrying a hint of defiance. He wasn't just standing up for Kilo. He was standing up for the principle of freedom, the right to choose one's own fate, to not be used as a weapon. The man's eyes glinted behind his visor, and he took another step forward. "You don't have a choice," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This isn't a request. It's an order." Luis, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Kilo isn't just a dog. He's been through things that most people can't even begin to imagine. He's not a tool for you to use. He's earned his freedom." The taller man ignored Luis, his gaze never leaving Cal. "You're standing in our way. Move aside." The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the anticipation of violence. Cal felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He knew that if these men didn't back down, it was only a matter of time before things escalated. They had come prepared. Cal could tell from the way they moved, the way they positioned themselves. They weren't just here to take Kilo. They were here to eliminate any threats. But Cal wasn't backing down. Not now. Not after everything they had been through together. "Not happening," Cal said, his voice low but resolute. "You're not taking him." The taller man motioned to his partner, who moved behind him, pulling out a set of handcuffs and securing them tightly. "We'll give you one last chance," the man said, his voice cold. "Move aside, or we'll take you by force." Luis stepped forward, positioning himself between the men and Cal. "You don't want to do this," he warned. "This isn't just about Kilo. It's about what he's been through and what you've done to him." The man seemed to hesitate for just a moment, but then the tension broke, and he made a sharp gesture toward his partner. "Secure the dog," he ordered. In an instant, the situation erupted into chaos. The second man lunged toward Kilo, but the dog wasn't going down without a fight. Kilo's instincts kicked in, and he was on the man in seconds, his teeth bared in a vicious snarl. The man barely had time to react before Kilo's jaws locked onto his arm, dragging him down to the ground. "Get him off!" the man screamed, struggling against the dog's hold. But it was too late. Kilo had already made his move. The second man, stunned and immobilized, struggled to break free, but it was clear he wasn't going anywhere. Kilo held his ground, his powerful body pressed against the man's, his growls a constant reminder of the strength the dog had retained despite everything he had endured. The first man reached for his weapon, but Luis was faster. He moved quickly, disarming the man in one fluid motion, using his own body to push him against the helicopter's frame. "I warned you," Luis growled, his voice low and dangerous. Cal moved to Kilo's side, his heart pounding in his chest. "Good boy," he whispered, patting the dog's head gently. But the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the first man regained his footing, he motioned toward the helicopter, signaling for reinforcements. Cal's pulse quickened. This wasn't just a standoff anymore. This was a battle for survival. They were coming for Kilo, and they weren't going to stop until they had him. The tension that had built in the air suddenly shifted, becoming something raw and desperate. Cal's mind raced as the first man scrambled to regain control of the situation. Kilo, still holding onto the man with a grip that refused to loosen, growled fiercely, refusing to let go. The scene was chaotic, but there was no time to waste. Cal knew that as soon as the reinforcements arrived, things would get much worse. "Move!" Luis shouted, shoving the first man to the ground with surprising force, causing him to stagger backward. Cal didn't need any more prompting. He was already halfway to the truck, grabbing Kilo by the collar and pulling him away from the struggling man. Kilo hesitated, his teeth still bared, but Cal's command was enough. The dog reluctantly released the man's arm, following Cal as he ran for the truck. Luis was right behind him, his expression hard as he kept an eye on the two men, who were now trying to gather themselves. The helicopter rotor blades were spinning faster, the hum in the air growing louder as the second man started to climb into the vehicle. "They're coming for us," Luis muttered, his voice tight with urgency. "We've got to move now." Cal was already in the driver's seat, the truck's engine roaring to life as he slammed his foot on the gas. The wheels spun as they tore out of the marina parking lot, tires kicking up gravel. The helicopter was lifting off behind them, its low, ominous hum making the air feel thick with danger. The men had not given up. They were coming for them. In the rearview mirror, Cal could see the black SUV following them, its headlights cutting through the foggy morning like predators in pursuit. The helicopter was still hovering above, its presence like a shadow following them, an ever-present reminder that they were not in control of this situation. They were being hunted. Luis turned to Cal, his eyes scanning the rearview mirror. "We need to lose them. If they catch up, they'll take Kilo, and they'll take us too." Cal nodded grimly, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. The truck barreled down the winding road that led inland, far from the marina and into the dense wilderness. The landscape blurred around them as they accelerated, trees whipping past in the thick fog. Cal knew this land. He'd spent enough time in the wilderness during his service to know how to use it to his advantage. But these men, they were relentless. The SUV behind them was gaining ground, and the sound of the helicopter overhead grew louder, as though it was closing in. Cal could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He wasn't just fighting to protect himself anymore. He was fighting for Kilo, for the dog who had fought for his life in ways no one could understand. Kilo was more than just a military weapon now. He was a companion, a survivor, and above all, a symbol of loyalty. Cal wasn't going to let anyone take that from him. As the road ahead narrowed, Cal made a snap decision. He veered off to the side, taking the truck down a narrow dirt path that led into the Everglades. The rough terrain shook the vehicle as they sped through, branches slapping against the windows. The truck bounced, the suspension barely able to keep up with the uneven ground. "Kilo's gonna be okay," Cal muttered under his breath, trying to reassure himself as much as the dog. Kilo, sitting into the back seat, was panting heavily, his eyes wide and alert, his senses still sharp despite everything he had been through. He was with Cal, and Cal was determined to keep him safe. Luis turned to Cal, his eyes intense. "We can't keep running forever. We need to get off the road. Hide." "Not yet," Cal said, his voice steady. "We'll take a shortcut through the swamp, lose them there." The helicopter above was still hovering, its searchlight flickering in the thick mist, casting eerie shadows on the water below. The black SUV, meanwhile, was still on their tail, weaving through the dense trees in an attempt to catch up. It wouldn't be long before they would be caught if the K&O didn't get ahead of them. Cal slammed the truck into a higher gear, pushing the engine harder. The rough trail ahead was getting even more treacherous. Potholes, thick mud, and low-hanging branches threatened to slow them down, but Cal was focused. He knew the Everglades well enough to find his way through the maze of winding trails. If they could make it to the deeper parts of the swamp, they might just have a chance. Suddenly, Kilo let out a low growl, his ears swiveling as he peered out of the back window. Cal glanced over at the dog, a flash of recognition in his eyes. "They're close," Cal said, his voice grim. "We need to act fast." Luis pulled his gun from its holster, scanning the rearview mirror. "There's no turning back now. If they catch up, we'll be sitting ducks." Without another word, Cal took a sharp turn off the main trail, sending the truck plunging into the thickest part of the swamp. The tires splashed through murky water, the truck's engine roaring as it fought to keep moving through the sludge. The helicopter's searchlight flickered as it circled above, but it was getting harder for the men to track them through the thick vegetation. "This is our chance," Cal said, gripping the wheel tightly. "We keep moving. They won't expect us to cut through the heart of the swamp." Kilo barked from the back seat, his growl deepening as he shifted his position. The dog's senses were razor sharp, and it wasn't just Cal he was protecting. Kilo had become his own protector, fighting not just for survival, but for the bond they had forged in the face of danger. The truck lurched over a log, and then, with a sudden screech of tires, Cal found a brief moment of calm. The men in the SUV were no longer in sight. The helicopter had pulled back, no longer hovering so closely. For the first time since the chase had started, they had gained a small advantage. But it wasn't over yet. Luis's eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. "They're still out there," he said quietly. "Yeah," Cal said, his voice determined. "But we've got the swamp on our side now." And with that, they pushed deeper into the Everglades, hoping they had enough time to disappear into the wilderness. The fight for survival was far from over, but Cal wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not when Kilo's freedom and his own were on the line. The swamp seemed endless, a labyrinth of murky water, dense undergrowth, and shadowed trees. Cal's truck, now covered in mud and leaves, fought to stay on course, the engine sputtering as it struggled to push through the thick swamp. Kilo sat in the back, his body tense, his eyes alert, constantly scanning their surroundings. The growls and barks that had filled the truck earlier had subsided, but the air was thick with the unease that only Kilo could sense. The dog's instincts were sharper than anything Cal had ever encountered. He knew Kilo could feel the danger pressing in from all sides. He could feel it too. As the truck bounced over uneven ground, Luis sat silently beside him, his eyes sharp, scanning the foggy landscape around them. They had made it deeper into the swamp than Cal had expected. The air was thick with humidity, and the further they pushed into the heart of the Everglades, the more isolated they became. There was no sign of the helicopter now. Its engine had faded into the distance, as if the chase had momentarily paused. But that didn't mean they were safe. Not yet. "Do you think we've lost them?" Luis asked quietly, his voice tense. Cal's eyes remained focused on the path ahead, his grip tightening on the wheel. "Not sure, but if we keep moving, we might have a chance to shake them for good." Luis glanced out the window, scanning the horizon. The swamp around them was dense, the trees thick with vines and moss. It would be hard for anyone to follow them through this terrain, but Cal knew they couldn't get complacent. Whoever was hunting them wasn't going to stop easily. And the next move would have to be theirs. As they pressed forward, the truck's headlights flickered, casting strange, ghostly shadows across the landscape. Kilo's head jerked up at the sound of something moving nearby. His ears were alert, his eyes fixed on the dense brush. Cal's heart skipped a beat. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just the typical sounds of the swamp, the chirping of distant birds, the rustle of leaves. No, this was something different. Suddenly, from the thick brush to their right, a figure emerged. At first, Cal thought it was a trick of the light, but no, it was a man, moving swiftly through the trees. Cal slammed his foot on the brake, the truck screeching to a halt. Kilo was already growling from the back, his body tensed and ready to spring. "Get ready," Cal muttered under his breath, his hand reaching for the gun he had stashed beside his seat. His pulse quickened as the man came into clearer view. He was wearing tactical gear, his face hidden behind a helmet. He moved with purpose, and it didn't take long for Cal to realize that this man was no ordinary hunter. Luis, ever the professional, was already drawing his own weapon, his movements fluid and practiced. "Stay low. If it's a trap, we need to make a move fast." The figure didn't hesitate. He came closer, his footsteps swift, his movements deliberate. But he didn't seem interested in ambushing them, not yet. He stopped just short of the truck, his gaze locked on Kilo, who was still growling from the back seat. Without a word, the man pulled off his helmet, revealing a familiar face. It took Cal a moment, but then it clicked. The man standing before him was not a stranger. It was one of the men from the black SUV, the one who had been in charge, the one who had demanded Kilo's release at the marina. "I'm not here to fight," the man said, his voice steady, though there was a hint of something darker behind it. "I'm here to make sure you don't make things worse." Cal's mind raced. What was this? A trap? A warning? The situation had taken a sudden and unexpected turn, and Cal didn't trust it. But he knew one thing for sure: this man had answers. And he wasn't going to let him go without getting some. "You're not here to fight?" Cal repeated, his tone suspicious. "Then why the hell are you chasing us through the swamp? And what do you want with Kilo?" The man sighed, rubbing his temples as if the weight of what he was about to say was too much to bear. "Kilo isn't just any dog. He's part of a covert operation that went wrong, a project that was supposed to stay under the radar. Now we're trying to clean up the mess. And you, Cal, are making it harder than it needs to be." Cal's heart slammed in his chest. A project gone wrong? Clean up the mess? What mess was he talking about? "Kilo's not your tool anymore," Cal said through gritted teeth. "He's a living being. He has a right to be free." The man's eyes softened for a brief moment, almost as if he understood the sentiment, but then his gaze hardened again. "You don't get it, do you? Kilo was never meant to be free. He was trained for a purpose that doesn't involve running off into the Everglades. We have to bring him back. You don't understand the stakes here." Luis, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "What stakes? What kind of operations are you involved in? Who are you really working for?" The man looked at Luis, and for a brief moment Cal thought he might actually answer. But instead the man's expression shifted. "This is bigger than both of you. You don't want to know what's at play. And the more you fight, the more dangerous it becomes, for you and for Kilo." A chill ran down Cal's spine. The man wasn't bluffing. Whatever was going on, it was far from over, and he had just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Kilo's growl cut through the tension, a warning. The dog's eyes were locked onto the man, and for a moment Cal thought he could see the remnants of a military machine that had once been so well trained in the dog's stance, his unwavering loyalty to Cal shining through. The man took a step back, sensing the change in the air. "You've made your choice, Cal," he said, his voice colder now. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Before Cal could respond, the man turned and vanished into the swamp as quickly as he had appeared. Kilo's growls faded into the distance as the man disappeared into the thick vegetation, leaving behind only the lingering tension of what had just transpired. Cal's breath was shallow, his mind racing with the implications of the encounter. He had made it clear that Kilo wasn't a tool to be used again. But now it seemed like the stakes had escalated. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to let Kilo go easily. And the fight for freedom had just taken on a whole new level. The silence that followed the man's departure was thick and unsettling. Kilo sat in the back of the truck, his body still tense, as his ears flicking at every noise, every rustle in the swamp. He knew something had just changed. His instincts told him as much as Cal's did, but the question remained. What now? The man who had come for Kilo wasn't just any soldier or mercenary. He was part of a larger, far-reaching operation, something that Cal didn't understand fully yet. And as much as he wanted to ignore the looming threat, there was no escaping it. Whoever they weren't going to stop until they had Kilo back. Cal? Luis's voice broke the quiet, his tone soft but urgent. What now? Cal took a deep breath, his mind racing as he tried to piece everything together. The man had told him that Kilo wasn't just a dog, that he was part of something far more dangerous, that he was a weapon, trained for covert operations. The stakes were higher now. Kilo wasn't just a victim in all of this. He was part of something far more sinister. And if Cal was going to protect him, he needed to understand the full extent of what they were facing. I don't know yet, Cal said, gripping the wheel tightly, but we can't stop. Not now, they'll be back. And next time, they won't be so easy to escape. Luis nodded, his eyes scanning the thick fog that surrounded them. We need to keep moving then. But we also need a plan. We can't keep running forever. Cal didn't answer right away. He knew Luis was right. The swamp offered a temporary haven, but it was only a matter of time before the men came back with more reinforcements, more resources. They couldn't outrun them forever. Cal had always been a fighter, but this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for freedom, both for himself and for Kilo. They drove for hours, deeper into the swamp, avoiding the main roads and sticking to the less traveled paths. The truck jolted over rough terrain, the tires splashing through the shallow water that coated the ground. Kilo's eyes never stopped moving, scanning every shadow, every movement in the dense forest around them. It was as though the dog was constantly searching for the next danger. His instincts were sharper than ever, and they were his best chance of staying ahead of whoever was after them. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting an eerie orange glow over the swamp, Cal finally stopped the truck. They were miles from the nearest town, deep in the heart of the Everglades. And for the first time in what felt like days, they were alone. The stillness of the swamp was almost deafening, but it was a kind of peace that Cal needed, if only for a moment. He turned to Luis, who was staring out the windshield, lost in thought. We can't keep going like this, Cal said quietly. We need to figure out a way to put an end to this. We need to take the fight to them. Luis turned to face him, his expression hard but resolute. You're right. But we can't just charge in. We need information, more than just what we've got. Cal nodded, his mind working furiously. He had no idea who these men were or who they worked for, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever was going on, it wasn't just about Kilo. It was about something much bigger. The project the man had mentioned, the covert operations. All of it was part of a puzzle that Cal had to solve. He couldn't just run forever. He needed to end this. Do you think you can get in touch with some of your old contacts? Cal asked, his voice tight. We need to know what we're really dealing with. I don't trust anything they've told us so far. Luis didn't hesitate. I've got a few people who owe me favors. I can try to dig up more on these guys, but I don't know how much help they'll be. Whoever's behind this is pulling some serious strings. Cal exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping on the steering wheel. He knew Luis was right. The people they were up against had power, resources, and no qualms about using them. But Cal couldn't afford to back down now. Not after everything Kilo had been through. The dog had fought for his life. And now, it was Cal's turn to fight for his freedom. "Let's do it," Cal said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll take a few days to lay low, but we're not running anymore. We're going to find out who's behind this and make them pay for what they've done." Luis gave him a nod, the same resolve in his eyes. "I'll get started. But you'll need to be ready. This isn't going to be easy." Cal turned to look at Kilo, who was now lying on the seat beside him, his head resting against the door, his eyes half closed. The dog looked peaceful for the first time in days, as if he was finally able to relax, even if just for a moment. But Cal knew that peace wouldn't last long. The hunt was far from over. "I'm ready," Cal said, his voice low and steady. "We'll fight until the end, for you, Kilo, and for everything you've been through." The sun had set completely, and the swamp was now shrouded in darkness, save for the faint glow of the truck's headlights. The air was thick with the promise of rain, the distant rumble of thunder echoing through the trees. But for now, Cal allowed himself a moment of peace, watching the stillness of the swamp as it stretched out before them. It was a brief, fleeting calm before the storm. As the rain began to fall, heavy and relentless, Cal's resolve only grew stronger. They would fight, they would win, and Kilo would be free. The rain poured relentlessly, a steady, rhythmic sound that filled the air as it hammered down on the truck's roof. The dark night seemed to press in on them from all sides, the thick canopy of trees and the heavy mist of the Everglades, making everything feel distant, isolated. But Cal didn't mind. He had spent enough time alone in the wilderness to appreciate the stillness that came with a storm. It was the calm before the battle that lay ahead, and Cal knew this was just the beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of careful planning and quiet tension. Luis had worked tirelessly to reach out to his old contacts, gathering what little information he could on the operation that was hunting them. But every answer only seemed to lead to more questions. Whoever was behind this, they were good. Too good. Their trail was clean, their identities hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and shadow. But Cal wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not when he had Kilo to protect. Not after everything they had been through together. Kilo, for his part, had been a constant presence by Cal's side. The dog had recovered much of his strength, but his wariness never wavered. His eyes were always alert, his posture never fully relaxed. It was clear that he understood the weight of the situation. Kilo wasn't just a pet, he was a survivor, a warrior who had been through too much to simply forget his past. He wasn't going to let anyone take his freedom again. On the fourth day, the rain finally stopped. The oppressive clouds parted just enough to let the faint glow of the morning sun filter through, casting a soft light on the damp swamp. Cal sat on the truck's hood, his eyes scanning the horizon as he thought about their next move. They had to make contact with someone who knew more about the operation, someone who could point them in the right direction. Luis had some leads, but it was going to take time. And time wasn't something they had in abundance. "What's the plan, Cal?" Luis asked, his voice breaking the silence. He stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, watching Cal closely. "We need to take the fight to them," Cal replied, his voice firm. "We know they've been tracking Kilo, but we don't know why. It's time we make them come to us. We'll draw them in, make them think they got us cornered, and then we'll strike." Luis raised an eyebrow, considering the plan. "You're talking about setting a trap?" "Exactly," Cal said, his eyes narrowing. "Ooh, we've got the advantage now. They're not expecting us to come to them. They'll think we're hiding out here, too scared to make a move. But we're not scared. We're ready. And when they make their move, we'll be waiting." Luis gave him a long, thoughtful look. "You're sure about this?" Cal nodded. "We've come this far. I'm not running anymore. I'm going to make sure Kilo gets the freedom he deserves. And if it costs me everything, so be it." Kilo, as if understanding Cal's words, lifted his head from his paws and padded over to him. He stood beside Cal, his eyes locked onto the horizon as if preparing for the fight that was about to come. There was something in the dog's posture, something that said, "I'm with you, always." For a moment the three of them stood there together, the weight of the world pressing down on them. But in that stillness there was a kind of resolve that bound them together. Cal had never imagined he would be fighting for a dog. But now, it seemed like the most natural thing in the world. Kilo wasn't just a companion. He was a symbol of loyalty, of strength, of freedom, and Cal wasn't about to let anyone take that away. The next few days were spent preparing. Cal and Nina's son, Luis, mapped out a strategy, drawing on everything they knew about the operation that had been hunting them. They knew the men would be coming. They had to. They wouldn't give up so easily, but Cal wasn't worried. With Kilo by his side, he felt more confident than ever. Together, they could face anything. On the night before the showdown, Cal sat on the edge of the truck, watching the stars slowly emerge in the clear sky above. He thought about how far they had come, how much Kilo had endured, and how much they still had to face. The path ahead was uncertain, and the danger was real, but Cal wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had been replaced by a burning determination. He had a purpose now, something worth fighting for. "Tomorrow's the day," Louis said, sitting beside Cal. He glanced over at Kilo, who was lying by the truck, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes alert. Always watching. Cal nodded. "Tomorrow, we finish this." They didn't speak much after that. There was nothing more to say. They knew what needed to be done. The following morning, the world seemed to hold its breath. The air was still, the swamp eerily quiet, as if waiting for the storm that was about to come. Cal and Luis set the final pieces of their plan into motion, positioning themselves in a spot where they could watch the road leading into the swamp. Kilo stayed close, his presence a steady comfort in the midst of the tension that hung between them. And then they waited. Hours passed, each one stretching longer than the last, until finally the sound of engines reached their ears. The men in the black SUV were coming, and with them, the helicopter hovered in the distance, a dark, foreboding shadow in the sky. The trap was set. Cal looked at Luis, and then at Kilo. The dog was watching the horizon, his eyes locked on the approaching threat. Cal could see the resolve in the dog's stance. Kilo was ready. "This is it," Cal said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "Time to make sure they understand that Kilo's free." As the SUV drew closer, Cal knew there was no turning back. The operation that had once been a shadow, a whisper in the dark, was now real, and it was ending today. The moment had come. The fight for freedom was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming what had been stolen. Kilo's freedom and his peace were within reach. All they had to do now was fight for it.